Get her out of here. Now. She doesn't belong at this table. The leather chairs gleamed under the amber lights, and the air smelled of oak and expensive cigars. This was no ordinary meeting. This was the private boardroom of an elite club, a sanctuary of power where billion-dollar decisions were made over neat whiskey and whispered deals. She stood frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of every stare in the room. A black woman here? At this table? The man who had spoken leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a smirk, his voice still echoing through the tense air. You heard me, he added coldly, barely glancing at her. This meeting is for board members only. You're wasting everyone's time. Her hand tightened around the folder she was holding. Heads turned, some with disdain, others with faint amusement, all of them waiting to see what she'd do next. Security, the man barked. 2 guards appeared instantly, stepping into the room, their footsteps muffled against the thick carpet. One reached out and gripped her shoulder firmly. This way, ma'am. The folder slipped from her fingers, scattering papers across the polished floor like shattered glass. Someone in the corner pulled out their phone, camera light blinking, eager to record her humiliation. Her heels clicked against the marble as the guards led her toward the door, louder now with each step, almost defiant. Have you ever been somewhere, at work, in school, even at a party, and felt like everyone was silently asking, why are you here? Would you swallow it, or stand your ground? For just a moment, she thought about letting them take her out. After all, she'd been told she didn't belong her whole life. But not today. At the doorway, she stopped. The guards froze, confused. The room fell silent as she turned her head back, her voice steady, quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. I see how it is, she said. And this time, someone met her eyes and looked away. She walked out into the hall, the chill of the air conditioning biting at her skin. Her heart pounded, not with shame, but with fury, because she knew something they didn't. And what she did next would make every man in that room remember her name forever. Have you ever stood on the edge of saying what you really wanted to say? Did you hold it in, or let them have it? Tell me below. But what happened after that was even louder than the insult that started it all. She stood in the hallway, the muted hum of the city filtering in through the glass doors at the far end. For a moment, she let her back press against the cool marble wall, eyes fluttering shut. Her pulse was still hammering in her ears, but her breathing slowed as she steadied herself. Behind those doors, she could still hear faint murmurs, laughter, chairs scraping, the clink of whiskey glasses. Like nothing had happened. Like she was just nothing. Her hands balled into fists. Have you ever stood outside a room and felt the weight of everything you've ever endured pressed down on you all at once? The memories of every slight, every insult, every door slammed in your face, all boiling over in your chest? She opened her eyes, and they didn't shine with tears anymore. They burned. The guards who had followed her out gave her a wary look, but she just shook her head and murmured, I'll see myself out. They stepped aside. Her heels carried her to the lobby, the soft carpet muffling her steps now. The receptionist glanced up briefly, then quickly looked away. The club's logo, a gilded crest etched into the glass, caught her eye as she passed, and for the first time that night, a smile touched her lips. It wasn't a warm smile. Her car was waiting outside, engine purring. The driver sprang out to open the door, but she raised a hand to stop him. Give me a second, she said softly. She pulled her phone from her purse, fingers flying over the screen. A string of messages, sent in quick succession. Short, precise, orders. The driver peeked at her from the corner of his eye. He'd never seen her look quite like this before. Calm, but electric somehow. Like a storm about to break. When she finally slid into the back seat, she crossed her legs, glanced back at the building one more time through the tinted window, and murmured just loud enough to hear herself. They think I'm done? Cute. The car pulled away. And inside the private club, the meeting continued as if nothing had happened. But beneath the table, some of the board members were still glancing at each other, unease settling into their features. One of them, the youngest at the table, finally leaned over to the man in the pinstripe suit. You think she'll just let this go? He asked under his breath. The older man scoffed. Women like her? They never fight back. But his hand tightened slightly on his glass as he said it. Because deep down, he didn't believe it either. Have you ever underestimated someone, only to regret it later? Or maybe, have you been the one everyone doubted, until you proved them wrong? Tell me in the comments which side you've been on. And what she did next? Well, let's just say the board's night was about to take a very unexpected turn. The car rolled to a stop at the end of the block. She didn't need to be dropped at the door. Not yet. Not like them. She wanted them to feel it, to feel the ground shift under their polished shoes before they even understood why. From this distance, she could see the private club's golden lights spilling through the tall windows. Behind those glass panes, the men were still seated around the table, laughing, drinking, sealing their little deals. They thought it was over. She pressed a button on her phone, then brought it to her ear. "It's me," she said simply. "Go ahead." On the other end of the line, a voice responded with quiet certainty. "Yes, ma'am." She slipped the phone back into her purse, took one long breath, and stepped out of the car. The doorman startled slightly as she approached, his eyes darting to the guards inside. But she didn't break her stride. The soft click, click, click of her heels across the marble floor was louder now, commanding. Every head in the lobby turned toward her, and every whisper stopped midair. The guards at the double doors glanced at each other, unsure, before instinctively moving to block her way. She didn't even look at them. Instead, she fixed her gaze straight ahead and spoke. "Open the doors." Her tone was calm, but something in it made one of the guards flinch. One of the board members inside caught sight of her first. His drink froze halfway to his lips, and he hissed, "She's back." Chairs scraped. Faces turned. Confusion rippled through the room like a wave. And then she stepped in. The air changed. Nobody said a word. Have you ever walked into a room that once spat you out, and felt every pair of eyes finally see you for the first time? How would you carry yourself? Would you smile? Or just let them squirm? She walked the full length of the table, her heels striking the floor like a metronome, until she reached the head of the table, the same seat the pinstriped man had claimed as his throne minutes earlier. She set her purse down slowly, deliberately, then leveled her gaze at him. "You're in my seat," she said. The room gasped. He scoffed at first, though his jaw tightened. "You need to leave," he snapped. "Security." But the guards didn't move. She smiled faintly, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, the same one that had fallen earlier. She opened it, flipped it around, and laid it flat on the table. One by one, the men leaned forward to see the documents inside. Their faces drained of color. A cascade of ownership contracts, voting shares, proxy statements, signatures, their signatures. And at the very top, a name they hadn't expected. Hers. The youngest board member's voice cracked as he whispered. She owns controlling interest? She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on the man at the head of the table, who by now was gripping the arms of his chair as though it might save him. "You're in my seat," she repeated softly. He pushed back his chair slowly, but not gracefully. The legs screeched against the marble, echoing in the tense silence. She sat. The guards stepped back behind her now, like sentinels. Have you ever dreamed of sitting where they told you you'd never belong? And when you finally got there, did it feel like justice? Or just the beginning? Tell me which you'd feel, down below. But what she said next was what finally shattered the room. And that's where it gets terrifying. She sat at the head of the table now, and for a few seconds, the entire boardroom was frozen. No one moved, no one spoke. You could almost hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the nervous breaths of men who just realized the floor beneath them wasn't as solid as they thought. Her fingers traced the edge of the folder slowly, savoring the silence. Then she looked up. "You've all made a mistake," she said evenly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. A murmur rippled through the table, but she held up one hand, and the room fell quiet again. "You thought," she continued, her eyes scanning each face, "that you could decide who belonged here, that you could throw me out of my own meeting, that you could erase me, like you've erased everyone else who didn't fit your picture of power." Her gaze fell on the man in the pinstripe suit, who was now staring down at the table as if it might swallow him. "You were wrong." She leaned back in the chair, crossed her legs, and gave a faint smile. "You've all been terminated." At first, they didn't understand. Then it sank in. "What?" One of them started, but his words died as she snapped her fingers. The double doors swung open again, and this time it wasn't security that entered. It was her team, sharply dressed, purposeful, carrying stacks of papers and escorted by 2 uniformed club staff. One by one, they handed out envelopes to each board member. The men fumbled them open, skimming the papers, faces turning pale, then red, then blank. "You can't do this," one of them sputtered. She tilted her head, calm and unflinching. "Oh," she said, "I already have." One man stood, the youngest of the group, his chair tipping back and clattering to the floor. "This is outrageous," he barked. "No," she replied smoothly. "This is ownership. Look it up." At that, the room erupted. Some were shouting, others standing and waving papers. One storming toward the door only to be intercepted by security. The pinstriped man slumped back in his chair, his face ashen. And she sat still, watching them unravel. Have you ever dreamed of turning a room upside down? Not with anger, not with fists, but with sheer power? Would you enjoy it, or feel sorry for them? Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, then stood, collecting her folder and tucking it back into her purse. She gave one last look around the chaos she'd left behind. "Effective immediately," she said as she adjusted her coat. "You're all relieved of your duties. Club staff will see you out." Gasps and yells followed her as she walked toward the doors. But she didn't hear them anymore. Have you ever imagined what it would feel like to leave a room like that and know it was yours all along? Before I tell you what she revealed in front of the entire restaurant, I know you might be busy. Maybe you've got errands to run, or maybe your mind can only handle so much drama at once. But if stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss how it all unfolds. Because what she did next made everyone question everything they thought they knew about her. The door closed behind her with a muted thunk, sealing the chaos inside. She stood still for a moment in the quiet hallway, her pulse slowing, her breath steadying. Beyond those heavy wooden doors, she could still hear muffled shouts and chairs being shoved aside, the sound of grown men realizing the kingdom they'd built no longer belonged to them. But here it was quiet. And for the first time tonight, she allowed herself to smile. Her driver appeared at the end of the corridor, holding the door open for her, but she raised one finger, signaling him to wait. She turned instead to the gilded mirror that hung on the wall beside her. The reflection that stared back at her was calm, controlled, but she knew better. She saw the little girl from years ago, the girl who had waited outside these very doors while her mother worked nights in the laundry room, washing the white linens of the men who now scrambled inside. The girl who had been told to stay quiet, to keep her head down, to be grateful. The girl who had stood outside that same boardroom once, watching through a crack as the men laughed, smoked cigars, and made decisions that shaped lives like hers, and never thought twice. And she remembered what she'd promised herself that night. One day, she would come back, and they would know her name. Have you ever made a promise to yourself? One so quiet, so private, that no one else believed you could keep it? Did you ever keep it anyway? Her fingers grazed the edge of the mirror before she turned back toward the door. She wasn't done yet. Pulling her phone from her purse, she swiped to a waiting message thread. One name sat at the top, the only one she trusted completely. She typed quickly, "They've been removed. Begin phase 2. Seconds later, the reply came back. "Understood." She slipped the phone away and walked slowly to the exit. Outside, the night air was crisp, the city lights glittering against the dark sky. The street hummed with quiet energy, horns in the distance, footsteps on the sidewalk, lives moving forward, unaware of the quiet revolution that had just begun behind those walls. Her driver opened the car door again, and she slid inside without a word. As the car pulled into traffic, she rested her head back and closed her eyes for a moment. One promise kept, but there were still more debts to settle. Have you ever felt that, the strange calm after a storm? When you know the hardest part is over, but the real work has just begun. What would you do next? Take a breath, or strike again? The car glided down the avenue, its taillights disappearing into the night. And inside that club, as the last of the board members were escorted out into the cold, the whispers began to spread. Who is she? How did we not see this coming? But none of them yet understood what she had set in motion. Because when she returned, she wouldn't just take the board. She would take the entire club. And that was only the beginning. The car turned a corner and slowed, pulling into a discreet underground garage a few blocks from the club. The driver didn't speak. He didn't need to. He knew better than to ask where she was going, or what she planned to do next. The elevator ride up was silent, just the faint hum of machinery and the quiet click of her heels against polished marble. When the doors opened, they revealed a private office, hers. It was sleek, minimalist, with glass walls overlooking the city skyline. And on the far wall, framed and polished to a mirror's shine, hung the deed to the very club she'd just walked out of. She walked straight to her desk and pressed a button beneath it. A hidden panel in the wall slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, files, contracts, names, dates, everything she needed for what came next. Phase 2. Have you ever planned something so carefully, so patiently, that by the time you made your move, no one even knew they'd already lost? She sat down and began reviewing the names. Each one belonged to a man who'd sat in that boardroom tonight. And under each name was a list of every mistake they'd made, every underhanded deal, every shady transaction, every skeleton they thought was hidden deep enough to stay buried. She'd found them all, and now they'd pay. Her assistant appeared at the door, a young black woman, sharp, efficient. "They're calling already," the assistant said quietly, trying to renegotiate. "Some of them are threatening to go public." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Let them talk," she said. "No one listens to men who just lost everything." The assistant hesitated, then added, "And the press?" Her eyes glittered. "Not yet," she said. "Timing is everything." She rose from her chair and walked to the window, staring out over the city lights. Below, the streets bustled with people who had no idea a war was being fought quietly in their name. Because this wasn't just about a seat at the table. This was about rebuilding the table entirely. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to take back something that was never meant to be stolen from you? Would you stop there, or keep going? She pressed her palm flat against the glass, feeling the faint coolness on her skin. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo, sent anonymously. It showed the pinstriped man leaving the club, his head down, his coat collar pulled high. He looked small now, almost pitiful, almost. She stared at the photo for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the desk. Her assistant lingered by the door. "Should I start calling the next names?" She didn't turn around. "Yes," she said softly. "Tonight. Have you ever stood at the edge of power and realized it wasn't enough just to win? You needed to make them remember?" Because what she unleashed next would leave the whole city shaken. And it wasn't just revenge anymore. It was revolution. The next morning, headlines screamed across every major outlet. Private club board in chaos after overnight shakeup. Anonymous documents leak showed decades of corruption. New owner expected to restructure entire organization. She stood in her office, arms folded, watching the scrolling news feed on a massive wall screen. The images flashed by, the pinstriped man, caught mid-step by reporters, shielding his face from cameras. Another board member, cornered in a parking garage, shouting something about a smear campaign no one believed. Her phone buzzed relentlessly on her desk. Calls she didn't answer. Messages she didn't bother to read. Because she didn't need to. The city was already doing her work for her. Have you ever sat back and watched everything you built, every quiet move, every late night, every whispered plan, finally come together? How would it feel? Like justice? Or like something bigger? Her assistant entered quietly, tablet in hand. "They're requesting meetings," she said. "One by one. Even the chairman. Begging for a chance to explain." Her lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. "Explain?" she murmured. "I gave them years to explain. They said nothing then." The assistant hesitated, then ventured. "Should I tell them you're unavailable?" She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No," she said. "Tell them I'll see them." She picked up her coat, slipping it over her shoulders in one fluid motion. But not here. Her heels echoed through the quiet office as she walked out, leaving the assistant standing there, equal parts nervous and impressed. Downstairs, her car was already waiting. But this time she didn't go to the club. She went to the heart of the city, a high-rise tower gleaming in the morning sun, with the name of the club etched into its very stonework. This was where their money lived, where their power had once seemed untouchable. She walked through the front doors like she owned the place, because now, she did. The lobby fell silent as she crossed to the private elevators. The receptionist stood as if to say something, but one look from her silenced him. Upstairs, the board members were waiting in a sleek glass-walled conference room, looking every bit like men who hadn't slept all night. Papers were scattered across the table. Their faces were pale, drawn. She entered without a word, letting the door shut behind her. No one spoke at first. Then the chairman, still in his pinstripes, though now disheveled, stood and tried to muster what little authority he had left. "This isn't how we do things here," he began. She cut him off with a single, sharp word. Sit. And he did. She placed her folder on the table and slowly opened it, sliding it toward him. Everything you built, she said quietly, was rotten from the foundation up. Every deal. Every lie. Every time you told me I didn't belong. She met each man's eyes in turn, letting her words sink in. I don't just belong here, she continued, her voice low but steady. I own here. I own you. The room stayed silent, except for the faint hum of the air vents. Then one board member, younger, his face flushed, finally spoke. You can't do this, he stammered. The club, the board, it's bigger than you. Her gaze was ice. No, she said simply. I'm bigger than all of you. Have you ever stood in front of the people who tried to break you and realized you'd been holding all the power all along? What would you say? Would you forgive them? Or make them watch? Her fingers hovered over a stack of documents, ready to finish what she started. But what she pulled out next silenced the entire room. And that's where the real nightmare began. She didn't break eye contact as she slid the final envelope across the table. The chairman's fingers hesitated before picking it up, almost as if he already knew it held something worse than everything she'd revealed so far. The other board members craned their necks to see. He opened it slowly, the papers inside crisp and white, a thin stack. At first, he didn't react. Then his face blanched, color draining away like water. His hands started to shake as he flipped through the pages. And then he stopped, staring at a single photograph clipped to the top. A photograph no one else had seen yet. She leaned back slightly in her chair, calm, patient, letting him feel every second of what was coming. You thought your secrets would stay buried, she said evenly, her voice barely above a whisper but slicing through the thick silence. One of the younger board members reached for the envelope. The chairman's hand shot out, slapping it away, but it was too late. Another man snatched it and began flipping through. Gasps broke out. It wasn't just the chairman. It was all of them. One by one, each board member realized their names, their offshore accounts, their backroom deals, and their private misdeeds. Every single thing they thought no one would ever find were documented. On paper, in black and white, and in her hands. Have you ever seen fear take over a room? Not loud, not explosive, but quiet and sharp, like glass shattering inside someone's chest? One of the men stood abruptly, knocking his chair over. This is blackmail, he shouted. She didn't even flinch. No, she said softly. This is accountability. Another man buried his face in his hands, muttering something no one could understand. The youngest of them all just sat frozen, staring straight ahead, his knuckles white. The chairman finally spoke, his voice hoarse. What do you want? That was the question she'd been waiting for. She rose from her seat, slowly, gathering the stack of documents and tucking them neatly back into her folder. I already told you, she said, walking to the head of the table where the chairman still stood. She stopped just inches from him, her presence radiating power he could no longer deny. I don't just belong here, she murmured. I built this. And now, I burn it down. The entire room went dead quiet. Then she turned to leave, heels clicking like a metronome of judgment. At the doorway, she paused just long enough to glance back over her shoulder. You all have 24 hours to vacate your offices, she added casually. After that, your keys won't work. Gasps, whispers, and even a muffled curse followed her out into the hallway. But she didn't hear them anymore. Have you ever imagined walking away from a room that once tried to destroy you, knowing they'd never recover from what you just did? Would you feel guilt or satisfaction? The elevator doors slid shut around her, and for the first time all day, she allowed herself to exhale, slow and deliberate. But even as she descended to the street, her mind was already moving to what came next. Because while tonight had broken them, it was only the beginning of breaking everything they'd built. And the city hadn't seen anything yet. By the time her car pulled up to the plaza in front of City Hall, a crowd was already waiting. Camera crews jockeyed for position, lights blazing, microphones thrust forward. Reporters shouted questions over each other, their voices blending into a frantic roar. And at the center of it all stood the massive oak doors of the city's oldest institution, the same doors she'd walked through years ago, unnoticed, invisible. Tonight, she wasn't invisible anymore. She stepped out of the car, calm and composed, the click of her heels immediately cutting through the noise. The crowd parted as she passed, as if some unseen force pushed them aside. Flashes went off. People murmured her name. She paused at the bottom of the steps, letting her eyes sweep over the sea of faces, journalists, activists, curious onlookers. And in that moment, she smiled. Because this wasn't just about the board anymore. It was about showing the whole city that the game had changed. Have you ever imagined standing in the exact spot where you were once humiliated, and having the entire world waiting to hear what you'd say? Would you tremble or revel in it? She climbed the steps slowly, deliberately, until she stood at the podium. The cameras zoomed in, every channel in the city going live. She adjusted the microphone, then let the silence stretch just long enough to make them lean in. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady, her tone deadly calm. "For too long, this city has been run by a group of men who believed they were untouchable, who believed that power belonged only to those who looked like them, spoke like them, played their games." Her gaze swept across the crowd, catching the cameras head-on. They were wrong. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. She raised her folder and held it aloft. "In here," she said, "is everything they've done. Every lie, every theft, every family they destroyed to line their own pockets." Gasps, shouts. Reporters craned forward, shouting her name, shouting questions. She waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "And tonight," she said, her voice dropping lower, "this doesn't just belong to me anymore. It belongs to all of you." She handed the folder to the first reporter in front. He snatched it like it was gold. "This city deserves better," she finished. "And as of tonight, it gets better." The flashbulbs exploded again. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some stunned into silence. And through it all, she stood tall, unmoving, unflinching. Have you ever torn the curtain down and shown everyone what was really behind it? Would you stop once they knew? Or keep pulling until nothing was left? As she stepped back from the podium, the chairman and his former board stood huddled on the far edge of the plaza, watching helplessly as everything they'd built crumbled in front of the entire city. One of them shouted something at her, his voice hoarse, almost a plea. But she didn't even glance his way. Because tonight wasn't about them anymore, and what came next would leave the city in awe of what she'd been planning all along. The next morning, the city woke up to a new reality. Headlines blared her name in bold black letters. News anchors stumbled over themselves to recount every detail of the story. Social media was a storm of hashtags and trending clips, replaying her calm, devastating speech on the steps of City Hall over and over again. And yet, she remained silent. In her office high above the streets, she stood by the window, watching the chaos she'd unleashed ripple outward. Protesters gathered outside the private club's headquarters. Members resigned in disgrace. City officials scrambled to issue statements, some condemning her, others rushing to align themselves with her rising star. She'd seen it all coming, because she'd planned it this way. Have you ever watched a whole system crack open, knowing you were the one who drove the first wedge into its heart? Would you feel pride or something colder? Behind her, the phone rang constantly, requests for interviews, invitations to talk shows, politicians begging for meetings. Her assistant appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "They've all called," she said. "Every single one of them. Some are offering settlements. Some are threatening lawsuits. Some just want to talk." She turned, finally leaving the window. "Let them wait," she replied simply. The assistant hesitated, then added, "And the mayor?" That drew a faint smile. The mayor. Because she'd been waiting for him, too. Hours later, she walked into his office without knocking. The mayor, red-faced and sweating, leapt to his feet. "This is unacceptable," he bellowed before she even spoke. "You've thrown this city into chaos. You've embarrassed this administration. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She moved closer, placing her hands on his desk, leaning in just far enough that he could feel the quiet threat in her voice. "Yes," she said calmly. "I've reminded this city who really runs it. And it's not you." The mayor froze, his mouth snapping shut. She straightened, sliding a slim folder across the desk toward him. "What's this?" he muttered, reluctant to touch it. "Your resignation," she replied. Effective immediately. His eyes darted to hers, searching for even a trace of doubt. But he found none. Have you ever seen someone realize, truly, deeply, that their time is over? Would you feel sorry for them? Or would you let them drown in the truth? He slumped back in his chair, defeated. She turned to leave, but paused at the door just long enough to say, "You're welcome." Outside, The cameras were waiting for her again. Reporters shouting questions, flashing lights blinding her for a moment. But she just kept walking, down the marble steps, through the crowd, into the car waiting at the curb. This time, the crowd didn't just watch her go. They cheered. Some even chanted her name. She sank into the back seat, finally letting herself close her eyes. The city was hers now. But she knew better than anyone. Power never stayed still for long. And what she planned next would shake everything to its core. Days passed. And for the first time in decades, the city felt different. Gone were the secret backroom deals. Gone were the whispers of who you know and what you can pay. Gone were the men who once believed no one could touch them. In their place stood something new. Her. From her new office at the top of the tallest building in the financial district. Her building now. She watched the streets below. The city hummed with a quiet energy, a sense that something had shifted for good. But she didn't just watch, she worked. Meetings ran from dawn until midnight. Not with the same old names, but with people no one had bothered to invite before. Single mothers, union leaders, activists, young entrepreneurs who'd once been turned away from the same doors she herself had been shoved out of. She sat with them all, listening, taking notes, making plans. Because this had never just been about revenge. This was about rewriting the rules entirely. Have you ever dreamed of tearing down a system not just to watch it fall, but to build something better in its place? Would you dare? One evening, she stood on the rooftop of her tower, the wind tugging gently at her coat as the sun dipped below the skyline. Behind her, the city glowed gold. Her assistant appeared quietly at her side. "It's done," she said softly. "The club has been fully dissolved. The mayor's successor is already drafting a new ethics ordinance. And," she hesitated, almost smiling, "the press is calling you the woman who cleaned the city." That almost made her laugh. "They have no idea," she murmured. Because in her mind, she already saw 5 years ahead, where the city would be if she had her way. A city that finally belonged to everyone, not just the men in smoke-filled rooms. She walked to the edge of the rooftop and looked down at the lights below. "I made them remember my name," she said quietly. "But that's not enough." Her assistant tilted her head. "What is enough?" She didn't answer at first. Then she turned, her eyes steady, her voice like steel. "When every little girl in this city walks into a room like that," she said, "and no one dares to ask why she's there, then it's enough. Have you ever thought about what you'd leave behind? Not just your name, but your impact? Would you settle for being remembered, or fight to change what comes next?" She let her gaze linger on the skyline one last time before turning back toward the elevator. Because her work wasn't done yet. And tomorrow, the real legacy would begin. The next morning, she walked through the same heavy oak doors she'd been thrown out of weeks before. This time, no one stopped her. No guards reached for her arm. No board members dared to speak. The room was empty now, stripped bare. The long mahogany table where they'd once sat like kings was gone, replaced by an open space bathed in sunlight streaming through tall windows. She stood there for a long moment, breathing it all in. And then she smiled. Not the faint, calculated smile she wore in battle, but something warmer. Because she knew this was more than a victory. This was a beginning. Have you ever stood in a place that once broke you, and felt, finally, like you'd won? Did it feel like an ending, or the start of something bigger? On the far wall hung a single framed photograph now, not of the old board, but of her mother, standing in the laundry room of this very club decades ago, her hands red from scrubbing linen, her face tired but proud. She walked to it, letting her fingers graze the glass. "I told you I'd come back," she whispered. Her assistant appeared in the doorway, holding a stack of papers. "The first round of grants is ready to go out," she said. "And the new leadership council is waiting downstairs for you." She turned, taking one last look at the room before following her assistant out. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed with energy, young faces, eager voices, the sound of something alive and growing. She paused at the top of the stairs, letting her gaze sweep over them all. Every single one of them here, because she'd torn down the old walls. Every single one of them here, because she'd refused to be erased. Have you ever wondered what your name will mean when you're gone? Will they remember it for what you took, or for what you gave? She descended the stairs slowly, the sound of her heels mingling with the chatter below. One by one, people turned to watch her, their voices dropping, their eyes full of something she hadn't seen in years. Respect. Not fear. Not doubt. Respect. She reached the bottom step, adjusted the cuff of her coat, and smiled at the waiting crowd. You ready? Her assistant asked softly. She nodded. I've been ready my whole life. And with that, she stepped forward, disappearing into the sea of people she'd fought for. The woman who'd walked in alone and walked out having changed everything. Have you ever felt that moment when you know you didn't just win for yourself, but for everyone who comes after? Tell me, would you take that fight? Or would you let the world stay as it is? Because some names are meant to be remembered, and hers would be forever.